Before we get started, you know some of us, but maybe not all of us. So I'm going to start with introductions, and then you can go ahead and introduce yourself, and if you have any remarks or anything, whatever. Okay.
Fair
so
enough.
I'm Dan Shapiro.
Jack Sears.
Harry Gold.
Margaret Sheets.
Mike Duvall.
Jerry Levy.
David Kerpel.
Today is our first interview with candidates running for village trustee and village mayor, and Alan Farkas, an incumbent current trustee, has submitted an application to run again. So we will all have an opportunity to ask some questions over the next hour or so if we need all that time. And if you have anything you want to start us off with, feel free.
All right, well, first I need to thank all of you for participating in the caucus. The caucus serves a very important function, and I'm on camera now and I sit in the board meeting, so I think some people have some appreciation for what I do, and I think most people in the village don't know all the work that you guys do behind the scenes, and at least those of us that hold an office do recognize that. And we talk about the work of the caucus, and obviously you coming out here this morning is a minor part of that, but thank you. So I just am on the tail end of my first term as trustee, and I'd say the primary function of the first term for me has been educational. As much as I thought I was prepared for the position, and I feel like in the start of it, the first 2 years, I did fine. I don't think there were any missteps, but you really learn a lot as you go through. So I feel much better prepared for a second term than I was for a first term, learning more about how the village operates, all the work that is done by the commissions, the staff, having a better understanding and appreciation of what the residents expect out of the village and the trustees. These are all matters of degrees. It's not as if I went in completely ignorant, but you certainly learn as you go. So I'd say that's my primary qualification, is that the village entrusted me with the term to get up to speed on everything. So in terms of my professional background, I've been a lawyer for ballpark 20 years now. Most of my profession is focused on aviation law, and I'd say most people would probably start by wondering what that has to do with village government. And it's hard to answer that in a few words, but a lot of work that I do involves municipalities with airports and regulations and land use, an understanding and appreciation of how the legal system works, how grants work. There's a lot of interplay between private enterprise and public desires. In the aviation world, anytime there is an airport expansion, a new airport type use, we run into NIMBY issues. NIMBY, not in my backyard, and that's certainly something that we face on the board a lot. I also started my career focusing in real estate. First couple of years, I did more real estate litigation and real estate transactional work than anything else, and certainly that's something that comes into play. Since then, I've maintained a real estate broker's license, and I occasionally do a residential or a commercial closing. I'm currently part of a larger firm, but that's the result of a merger 2 years ago. So for 10 years, I had my own firm, which means I was a small business owner, which helps to understand the struggles of business owners in our community, the things that help businesses work, the things that are struggles for businesses, and I think that's a good background. Those are probably the main qualifications that I have, apart from being a citizen and resident of Deerfield. One of the things I made a point of the first time that I ran is that I was on the younger end of the spectrum. 4 years later, I'm still on the younger end of the spectrum. I have kids that are about to celebrate birthdays, so I'll call them 7 and 9. But you know, they're working their way through the school system. We interact with other young families. Being a trustee means being a liaison to other people within the town. Some of the things that I'm proudest of are the things that have been done on a local level, particular to some residents, problems that they've had either negatively with some neighbors and some issues that needed to be resolved, or helping to achieve something that is helping them to live their lives the way that they want. I didn't really come with much prepared, so you know, there may be some things that I've left off, and hopefully with your questions we'll address those, but hopefully I've addressed the main things that people would want to know about me.
Thanks, Alan. So we're going to open it up to questions. And Jerry, why don't you start and work our way around the table?
Well, first off, thank you for your 4 years of service. It's greatly appreciated. You mentioned the Northwest Quadrant Task Force being a useful tool as far as the comprehensive plan goes. Could you explain, because we're not really familiar with that?
Sure. Well, I assume everybody's familiar with the way that the downtown area is set up, and we have a certain focus on making sure that the downtown is developed in somewhat of a responsible way. So you've got the VCDC, and over time what happens is we have individual concerns that come up. For instance, we had this project at the start of my term dealing with the parking lot in the Northwest Quadrant, and whether we were going to turn that into some great green space and do some wonderful things with it came with a pretty heavy price tag. And there was an appreciation at the time that there were a lot of interrelated uses between the park that's over here and parking lots and the other commercial uses and the way that the residents access that space. And looking at that issue in isolation seemed to be counterproductive. So I think what's going on with the Northwest Quadrant Task Force started back then with the concept of being, we need to come up with some type of comprehensive plan focusing on that little area so that we know where we're going. And there has been a task force that's been in place. They're now working with consultants. I think we authorized the consultant to come up with 3 specific proposals to work up these developments, and if you've ever seen the way that they work out, we'll get some very detailed proposals, and hopefully there'll be some flexibility within there. I think typically what we see is an extreme on one end, an extreme on the other end, a compromise in between, and ultimately what we end up with is usually somewhat of a hybrid of the different scenarios. I hope that
I
answers
remember
your
that
question.
particular issue, and so how do the trustees get a feel for what the residents think about these issues?
Well, first of all, we do the best that we can to publicize everything that's happening on the board, and I think that that's been greatly improved over the past few years. All of our meetings are not only available on cable, but they're streamed, and anybody that wants to can just click their mouse and watch what's taking place. So we expect the residents to be watching and then providing their input to us. The meetings are open. Anybody that wants to show up can, and we do have lots of residents that show up and they voice their opinions both at the board meetings themselves, and typically on an issue like that we have what's called a committee of the whole meeting. And what it means is we bring together staff and we sit down in a setting somewhat like this where we're not presiding and really ruling on issues that come before us so much as having an open discussion. And I'd say that's the formal way. The informal way is all of us spend our time in town, whether it's at Starbucks or over at the various restaurants, and emails with our friends and constituents and saying, hey, what do you think about this? I think you also walk into any of those issues with a good feel for what people's priorities and concerns are. one of those that's obvious is fiscal responsibility. So we look at any issue, and from the start, we know that there's not a lot of extra money to throw around. So I think the starting point is this essential? Is this beneficial? Is it worth the price tag? Sure?
So looking back over the last 4 years, with all the issues that have come up and that you've dealt with, are there any that you feel, in hindsight, you could have handled better? Or differently, but also better than you did at the time?
That's a tough one. I think the only issue as a whole that I have some serious reservation over is the bike path underneath Deerfield Road. And I think in the end, the village cost was somewhere in the neighborhood of $600,000–700,000. And there was a lot of creep involved in that. Anytime you're dealing with an area where you have all these utilities coming together, so you've got this Metra crossing and all the utilities are going across there, so just touching it is a very expensive proposition. We knew that going in, but the costs just continue to escalate, and I haven't gotten to the point where I would say that it was a mistake or that we shouldn't have passed that, but I think what happened is along the way, things just ratcheted up, and there was more of a momentum to it than stopping and really reevaluating once we had all of the final costs in. Now, the other thing that weighs heavily in that decision is it was, I think, an 80% federal match. So if we didn't go through with it, then this is money that would have been spent in other communities. And there's a strong feeling that if we all are paying federal taxes, we'd like to get the benefit of that. And I don't think that there's any dispute that having the expanded pathway is a big benefit, but it's hard to say in the end whether it's worth the amount that it costs us, even for our small percentage. So, that's probably the biggest thing that comes to mind in terms of other things that we could do better. I think there's some discussions that when you look at it in hindsight, the way that we've interacted with people coming before the board, it's always nice to be able to say to people that they've had a good experience coming before us. We want people to feel welcome and open to share their views, and sometimes it tries on your patience a little bit, and we're all human. So I'm sure in hindsight I find myself thinking maybe I could have been a little more patient with this person or that person.
What was the project originally budgeted at from Deerfield's out-of-pocket expenses?
I don't have that at my fingertips. I'm comfortable saying that it was a couple clicks lower, and as with a lot of projects, as they started digging deeper into it, the costs began to escalate.
And that was the sole purpose of that project, to expand the bike path?
Right.
No other drainage issues or anything, it's just the bike path?
Yeah, that was it. I don't know how much you went through there before, but that side of the road, the southern side of Deerfield Road, where the path is, was as wide as the northern side is. So if somebody's going through on a bike, that's it. That's all that's happening. A mother that's pushing a child can't get through. Pedestrians can't get through. The idea of biking east to west really is not feasible except on the roadway, and as you know, that's a pretty narrow passageway for cars in there. So I think that there was a need for it, but everything being equal, we paid a high price for it. I think you're up.
Okay. Did you discuss specifics before?
Just feel free to ask any questions.
What do you think is your crowning achievement over the past few years? Kind of the opposite question I was just asked.
Yeah, I'm not going to really be able to single one thing out, but I'll give you a few things that I feel that I had a strong personal role in. First, as I said earlier, some of the individual resident issues. So there was a resident, actually a few I can think of, that complained of eyesores nearby and didn't know how to get through to the appropriate people in the village. So serving a liaison role and making sure that those were things that were being addressed. On the positive side, I can think of two, again, circumstances where we had some new residents coming in and we're having some concerns with some of the construction issues. One of them had an issue with a sewer line that was causing some problems. Another person had some issue with some trees. And I think somewhere along the way there were some issues that came up with some permits. So again, playing somewhat of a facilitative role. And again, I think that's where being a trustee is a role where you really can do some good that people recognize. How it doesn't do things on a grandiose level. On a larger scale, I think I was instrumental in modernizing the way that we as a board do business. Before I came on the board, every week the police would deliver printouts and CDs of the material that we would be looking at, and I thought that was ridiculous, so we moved to an electronic distribution. I also played a large role in developing our new online streaming system. Now, all these things, I want to be clear in saying nothing that takes place on a board level do I do solely. It's a matter of working with staff and encouraging and making suggestions and kind of ushering things around. We've had a couple issues that have been in litigation. ComEd, there was an issue with the tennis courts over at the Mitchell Park, and we had litigation involved in that. And any time there's a few lawyers I know that are in the room here, I'm aware of two. There, maybe more of you. It seems like a natural role for us to play in these things. You want to say, I'm not here as a lawyer, but ultimately whenever you serve in a role with these groups, people tend to turn to you for that kind of experience. So even though we have our own attorney who's really good, Peter's done a wonderful job, to be able to bridge the gap between the legal advice that we're getting and the concerns that the trustees have, and to say, this is really what we need to do here, and I think the board has valued and appreciated the advice that I've had on that. And then probably the other thing that I feel that I've been a strong voice on would be, again, what I'll call these NIMBY issues. When Starland moved, when we had further development of Woodland Park, those are a couple things that come to mind. Time and time again with these types of large-scale development issues, the neighbors that live immediately adjacent to the project feel particularized concerns about what's happening there. And it's something that has to be handled delicately, because certainly we want to do what we can to address any individualized concerns, but we have to look at what's good for the village as a whole. Myself, I live adjacent to a park, and when there's soccer games and softball games and other things that are going on, it affects us. People are parking on the street, blocking the driveway, et cetera, et cetera. But I also have the benefit of this large open space, and it's nice to look out the window and see the activity that's going on there. So there's a give and take, and I recognize that as a village, this is what it's all about. Sharing the burdens and also the mutual benefits. So again, I feel like we did reach the right results in those. We did what we could to address the localized concerns, but also, again, Starland has moved. Woodland Park, if you haven't been there, is fabulous. A similar issue was the development of the paddle courts over at the golf club. Had a lot of concerns from the residents across the way. The lights, the noise. So again, we did what we could to address that.
Follow-up, Alan, you mentioned the bike path costs. As an example, when projects like that come before the Board of Trustees, how, maybe you could take a few minutes to explain the process of examining like the cost-benefit analysis, the projected project costs, and how firm the forecasts of costs are versus that include their slack estimates of slack, and in other words, to try to perform the reasonability test around the business case for doing work like the bike path. So I would sort of say, gee, if the board is saying that costs a lot of money, then why didn't the board know about it, or take that into account up front, knowing that typical municipal projects rarely come in on budget, would be my guess, but that's a statement more than a question.
But let me answer this way. The waste treatment plant is a multi-million-dollar project. It's taken place over several years, and we're going to come in within 1% over budget. Okay? Our street projects typically come in under budget. We do budgets for vehicle replacement, and time again, we're able to beat our budget on that. And the difference between those projects and what happened with the underpass is every other time we know what we're dealing with a heck of a lot better than when we're dealing with this Metro situation. Okay, how does it work? It works like this. We see an initial proposal that's put together by staff. We have some very good engineers on staff. When they need to, they reach out to outside consultants, and they give us their best package on here's what it looks like, here's the pros and cons, here's the cost, here's everything we know about it. When it comes to us, I'd say probably more times than not, we find that their information is sufficient for us to at least bring it to a public hearing and discuss and pass judgment on it. But it's not uncommon for us to turn back to staff and say, there's some areas here that we think you haven't covered adequately. Go back and look at this, answer this question, answer that question. The underpass project came to us with a big asterisk. We're dealing with Metro, we're dealing with the utilities, and there's a certain amount that we're just not going to know until they get into it. And even though we had the benefit of some folks who had dealt with Metro before, and we have some folks who have some, I'll say, good connections behind the scenes at Metro, we underestimated what was involved in that. It's a delicate project as far as Metro is concerned. You know, we look at it as, hey, we just want to put a wider sidewalk here. But all it takes is a reminder of what happened recently with that tragedy in Glenview, that couple that was crushed by a train, to appreciate that we're dealing with some pretty sensitive stuff here, and we can appreciate why Metro would want to make sure that whatever's done there is done right. So,
could I ask a follow-up question?
Please.
You raised an interesting question in my mind about the role of the trustees in intergovernmental or interagency. Like, for example, in the bike path as an example, how do the trustees get involved with the Metro group, or maybe at the federal level with the railroad boards or whatever? I think that happened a few years ago with the noise from the train whistles. I think there was some local involvement in the regional interagency or intergovernmental affairs. It's my belief, I'm not sure, but how does that typically occur when you're involved with infrastructure projects? Is there a trustee assigned to an intergovernmental agency? like Metro, for example?
There's not. I mean, really, you need to think of us as guardians or the oversight for staff. So that's principally a function of the staff of Kent Street, the village manager, or at times the engineering staff, and they've developed those relationships. You know, that's what they do. At times, if we have the need for more of a political type of outreach, that's the mayor's job. But you know, I guess if you think of the difference between the FBI and the CIA, right? I don't know why that example comes to mind, but you know, there's a domestic group and there's an international group. Our job is to stay here, and our role really is pretty much confined. Now, you know, when I'm downtown going about my business and doing what I do, obviously I'm a ambassador and a big promoter of the town, but the business of the trustee really takes place here.
I want to talk about, I think, a fairly big issue, which would be property taxes, residential property taxes in town here. And I was wondering what, you know, we can do as a village to voice our concerns to the Lake County Board about these rising taxes. Lake County is rated like in the top 20 in the whole United States for property taxes, and I think that's an issue that's really the village is going to have to face.
Well, I agree. I recognize that as a struggle. I think it's a difficult conversation when you start with, we want taxes to be lower. Okay, that's kind of like waking up in the morning and saying, I just want to travel on 4-lane highways today. You have to know where you're going before you can map out the route to get there. So on the trustee level, I think our primary concern is, what do we want of our village? What services do we expect? What do we expect out of the parks? What do we expect out of the schools? And understand that we have different taxing districts, and that's really where your property taxes are coming from. So what we can do on the trustee level, on the board level, is more of an influence role than really governing on those issues. And one of the initiatives that we as a board and with the mayor have tried to do is to communicate better with the park board and the library board and the school districts, so that we are not working against each other when we have big projects going on. Within the past few years, I think part of the impact that you've seen is a lack of coordination, and that's one area that really can be improved upon, so that if the parks have a project on the horizon, if the schools have a project on the horizon, if the village has a project on the horizon, we're not doing that all at once, so there's a spike in property taxes. Now, other than that, it's a matter of trying to gain efficiency with the county. The roads, the other areas that the county is responsible for, it's having communication, doing what we can to keep that down. Pensions is a big issue, and that's happening on a state level. That's something that you're feeling in the property taxes. It's a concern that we have, and probably one of the biggest frustrations that we have is that something that we hear about probably more than anything else is, what are you doing, what can you do about the property taxes? And the frustration is that the village is responsible for, you know, such a minor component of that directly. So all we can do is do the best we can to influence those decisions.
Just one real quick follow-up then. Given the tax situation, and you said in paragraph 8 that you want to do a better job of attracting business to Deerfield. That being said, when we talked about the tax base, how are you going to attract new businesses, since they're aware of the taxes as well?
Well, they are, but businesses are also aware of the citizens that are here and the demographic that's available to them. Okay, we are an attractive place for businesses, and they need to know and recognize that there are spaces available and that we're going to welcome them. Now, the board gets a lot of criticism for, I'll just say, some of the more problematic areas in town. Now, I've been on the board 4 years, almost 4 years, and I can tell you that the areas that are identified as problematic have been problematic a hell of a lot longer than that. They've been problematic for decades. So this isn't a problem that gets solved overnight, and given the current economic problems that the country is having, it's no surprise that some of those areas are being hit even harder. On a gross level, the village is doing very well, doing much better than the neighboring communities. And if you make a comparison of what our property values are, people's ability to sell their houses, to refinance their houses, that's a good measure of where we're doing, and that's a good barometer for businesses that are looking at, what is a vibrant community that they want to come into. So, what can we do better to attract businesses? Well, one of the things that we've been talking about on a board level is getting a professional ambassador type. There are other villages and towns and communities within the city of Chicago, for instance, that promote their village as a place to either come live or develop a business. And that's an approach that we haven't tried, that we're looking into. The difficulty that we have is not wanting to unfairly advantage some of the commercial properties over others. So to the small business owner who's had to do everything on their own, they justly look at any of the concentration that we have on some of the other commercial properties that are struggling. Say, how come I didn't get that help? Why are you doing that over there? And that has to be measured against the benefit that we all achieve by having thriving businesses. So it's a delicate issue.
Thank you.
How concerned are you about what is or what is not going on at Deerbrook, and how much influence does the village have on that?
Very concerned, and not too much.
Okay.
I mean, that's one of the areas that obviously was on my mind when I'm saying it's been a problem for a long time. And I will say that I am proud that when Deerbrook came to us, and we're now, 6-8 months ago, and there was a proposal that we do some sort of, it wasn't really tax increment finance, but more people are familiar with that than what we were talking about, where we would give a huge benefit to Deerbrook so that they could redevelop. And I really turned the tide on that. The board as a whole was ready to take the next step and sign a letter of agreement. And I reversed the tide and said, not so fast. This is giving away a little too much. We need to look at this more closely. I'm disappointed that the redevelopment ultimately unraveled. It had more to do with Juul's parent company, SuperValue, and whether it's bankruptcy or reorganization, whatever it is, their financial health had more to do with that project stopping dead in its tracks than anything else. But it was the beginning of a discussion of what are we as a village willing to do to help private enterprise. We want to encourage Deerbrook to redevelop the property. We want to encourage Deerbrook to bring in new business. The nuts of that, nuts and bolts of how that's going to take place is a bit of a challenge. So I'm comfortable with the idea of us having an ambassador, somebody to go out and promote and to bring business into the village as a whole. And if they happen to end up at Deerbrook, great. If they end up somewhere else, great. I feel that playing somewhat of a neutral role is easy. What we can do with Deerbrook itself, I don't know that I have an easy answer, because again, they should be motivated by their own desire to turn that property around and make it profitable. So it's a concern, it's something that we think about, it's something that we spend time on, it's something that we talk to staff about, but I don't have a book on a shelf that says here's the answer.
Do you have any concerns that some of these strip mall owners or mall owners are dragging their feet to see what kind of benefits that the village would provide to them if they do nothing for several years? Is that a concern? And you talked about you almost had an agreement on something and it came back. Are they just waiting to see what kind of benefit they can get if they do nothing? So are they encouraged to do nothing for a while to try to wait you out?
I'd have to say, honestly, I haven't given that much thought, but if that's the way they analyze things, then that's tremendously foolish. Their profit margins have to be much larger than any of the potential tax benefit that we could possibly grant. They're in the business of developing these commercial properties, of bringing in different businesses, and they didn't go into that business with the expectation that they were going to thrive based on what any particular municipality could do for them. I think they're struggling, and I think that a lot of these strip mall owners have competing properties. They're not just, these are larger owners that aren't just in Deerfield, they're in other communities. And it's not just a question of what's happening with our national economy or the world economy. It's also a matter of recognizing that the way consumers do business is changing. So Best Buy didn't move out of Deerbrook just because the economy is down. Best Buy went out of Deerbrook also because of the rise of the internet and people not shopping at brick and mortar stores as much as they used to. And that's something else that we're going to have to contend with as we think about our tax base. I don't know that 10 years from now we're going to be able to rely as much on sales tax as we do. I'm not sure between here and there how we evolve and how that changes, but clearly we are doing business differently today than we used to.
So the board has an interest in attracting business to the area. Obviously, these commercial property owners have an interest in attracting businesses to rent or buy their spaces. How does that get balanced? I mean, you mentioned that some of these mall owners have competing properties, and they have a lot of interests on the table. Does that mean there's a bigger role for the village to try to attract businesses to our specific area if some of the mall owners are kind of ignoring their properties?
Well, I don't know that the fact that that the mall owners have competing businesses changes the dynamic of what the mayor and the staff need to or should be doing. I think it's just a reality when you understand what drives the mall owners. They're looking at their bottom line figures year over year, and they can be profitable and successful regardless of what's happening at just this property. Okay, so yes, we do recognize that it's not as much of a priority for them as it is for us. I can tell you that I know the village manager, the mayor, other staff do spend time on this and do have talks with businesses that are interested in coming here. What can we do? Making sure that they understand all the benefits of coming here. And if I had some brilliant, great idea, and it's not an ego thing, it doesn't have to come from my brain. Anybody that comes to us with a good idea of what we should be doing, what we could be doing differently, I'm going to champion. We can get together with the businesses. We obviously have a good relationship with I don't know why the name escapes me, but we have the commercial organization for Deerfield and Bannockburn, and we do share ideas. But again, this isn't a problem that developed overnight. This has been a long-standing concern. So we're going to keep looking at it, but I can't make that any succinct promise that here's how we're going to turn it around, because it's something that we just continue to think about and work on.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
I think you indicated that the relations between the board and the village manager and the staff is very good. Any objectives there for the next 4 years?
at least the way I interpret that is, you know, are there some criticisms, are there things that I feel are in need of change? And I can tell you that as part of the financial budgeting issue over the past number of years, we've really encouraged the staff to get by with less, and they have, and it's really been a lean operation. So I think the best we can do is to encourage staff to continue to find ways to increase their efficiencies, to keep things lean and mean, to modernize. We have great IT folks, and as much as we can do to be smart about the way we go about doing business. I'm more concerned about what may be a short-term benefit where we're going to be losing some of the more seasoned, experienced folks. And obviously we will save something on salary as they're replaced. We just lost a financial manager who had been with the village for a long time. I think the younger man who replaced him is really good and really talented, and we're lucky to have him. Okay, so there's some savings there, but in the other departments, I am concerned with some people who will be retiring in the next few years, and yeah, there'll be savings there, but there's experience that's been built up over time, and that's a concern.
So as a follow-up, so what role does the board have in succession planning then? Did they interview candidates and so on?
That's a good question. You know, with the financial manager, we all got to know Eric Burke, who is the successor. So I know there was discussion with us about Eric replacing, and he came from inside. So I would think that that's a good model.
Sure.
I honestly don't know if we have any procedure in place for how we go about opening it up to outsiders if we feel it's necessary for other positions. I don't think that the trustees would be involved in the initial interviews, but you know, maybe as things get finalized, and certainly no final decisions can be made with at least an approval. So we would be involved in the final say down the line.
Thanks.
Any other follow-ups, any other questions?
I have a question, follow-up question, Alan. On, in paragraph 12, talking about balancing the roles of government with business development. And at the national and state level, at least I think in this last election cycle, the regulatory authorities have come under criticism at many levels. I'm not talking about the village of Deerfield, but do you see opportunity in the regulatory authority within the span of control of the trustees to step back and look at how business-friendly we are from a regulatory perspective?
Yeah, I think that's something that deserves a good look. My personal philosophy is for government to get out of the way as much as possible, okay? But the balance is there's a lot of essential services, so you know, I have no interest in diminishing the street cleaning service, you know, in the winter when our streets are clear and the neighboring communities are filled with ice and snow, or when our crews are out in the middle of the night fixing manhole breaks. Okay, those are essential services, and I have no interest in diminishing that. But I do think that there's room for improvement in the regulatory process, and this is something that I've talked about. Most recently, there was a new business that went into, and you know, forgive me, I've always had trouble with the names of all our areas, but next to the Starbucks of Deerfield Road, there was a business that went in over there, and it was a beauty salon, and they had to go through the full regulatory review in order to get in there. And my remarks at the hearing were, you know, this should be a no-brainer. There's lots of open space there, and if this vacant space isn't ideal, for a beauty salon, then what would we want to go in there? You know, why is there not the ability to do a streamlined approach? I understand, again, it's the village center, and there's parking concerns and other zoning issues, so I wouldn't want to put a bright line rule in place that says if you're one of these businesses, then you get a free pass, but I'd like there to be a procedure that says that if the Planning Commission or VCDC signs off and says this looks like an easy case, then we can skip some of the other reviews. I think some of the signage requirements we've scrutinized a little bit recently. There was an issue with Wonder, and we just had this Carson sign come before us, and there needs to be a balance. We don't want Deerfield to be a blight with flashing neon signs and crazy billboards as soon as you come off the highway and start driving down Deerfield Road, but I also think we can do a better job of letting businesses do what they feel they need to do to promote. And I'll give you one other example that I was somewhat vocal on. The Parkway commercial project, which is on the west side of town, there were some vacancies there, and the commercial broker came before us and said we want to do a new highway sign. And the constraints would normally say they can only have, I don't know, 2 or 3 panels, but they thought that they would be able to fill the space better if they could do, I don't know what they wanted, 4 or 5, 6 panels. Because to be able to say to a new tenant, we're going to give you a sign that will be visible from the highway, they thought that would help them promote. And I was very vocal in saying, you know what, they're the experts here. If they think they need that, great. Let them have what they want. And I really did not get the concerns that said that, you know, gee, the sign's too cluttered, or it may be distracting from the highway or anything like that. I didn't get that at all. And I think, for the most part, if a business says, here's what I need to be successful, we should try to work with them.
Anything else?
What level of consensus do you, are we generally getting in the current makeup of the board as far as votes go, opinions going into a vote?
It's pretty rare that we don't have full consensus, and that's a matter of having good discussion and talking things through. I don't think that we all come at things from the same issue. I don't think we share the same viewpoint, but if DC functioned as well as we did, then I think the country would be in a much better place right now. So, we do find ways to find middle ground and do things, again, that's for the good of the community. And I'll share one perspective, that it helps that the trustees live here, and we do feel the impact of every decision that we make. And as much as our leaders in Congress, or I don't want to offend anybody with the current election, a lot of feelings are still raw, but I don't believe that leaders on that level ever really feel the impact of their decisions, regardless of what they call home. I think they tend to live in a different environment. So every decision that we make is made with an understanding that we feel it.
Thank you.
Sure.
One last thing, you sound very committed to the city. I appreciate that. Based on what you know today, is there any reason you might have to leave the area?
No. My profession is here. I have family all over the area. My wife has family all over the area. My kids are doing well here. In fact, I don't know why the rest of the world doesn't live in Deerfield.
Alan, thank you for taking the time on a Saturday morning to meet with us.
My pleasure.
We, as you know, there are several candidates who will be running. This process will conclude on the evening of the 19th. So you're the first of several more, and we thank you. And I think that concludes our questions.
Okay, thanks, everybody.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.